This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hi guys, in this tutorial I will show you how to create realistic looking clouds using Blender 2.82 and Eevee. So this will be great to be used in a backdrop for any of your scenes. And this tutorial will also be beginner friendly. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Before I start the tutorial, I know many of you are working from home and perhaps feel a little anxiety and fear over the coronavirus pandemic that is affecting everyone globally. Keep faith in the fact that this pandemic will eventually end, and make sure to keep not only your physical but also your mental health in check during the next few months while you stay at home. Spontaneous acts of creativity may help break up the routine of a day spent indoors and also help to settle your mind. Skillshare offers classes that may help express what you're feeling through creative self-discovery and will also help you to break the monotony of home life. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. A class that I found awesome was a class called Blender 3D, Your First Character by Remington. He breaks down how to create your own stylized character from scratch using Blender, and the lessons are easy to understand and bite-sized. He also covers rigging the character, which is great if you want to go away and animate it for a project. Skillshare's classes are curated for learning, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can follow wherever your creativity takes you. And it's all for less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. However, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to use this link will get a 2-month free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. You will need to hurry though, as this offer is only for the first 1,000 of my subscribers only. Back to the video. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make use of this existing cube, and we're just going to go ahead and scale it to pretty much encompass the entire the cloud area. So in this case, I'll probably leave the Z-axis as is, but I'll just scale up on the X and Y axes. So to do that, hit S to start scaling, and then Shift Z to scale on every axis except the Z axis. And just scale it up until you want it around about the size that you want. So in this case, I might just go ahead and hit the number 5 on my keyboard. So hitting S, Shift Z, 5 will scale it up 5 times except on the Z axis. So we have something that looks like this. So our cloud will pretty much be over here. Also, I'll go ahead and position the camera so that it faces up at the clouds rather than down. Or actually, I'll keep the camera there, but let's move the clouds up and let's rotate the camera. So I go 0 on my numpad to go into the camera view, and then hit RXX, so RX twice, and then let's just move it up until it faces the clouds around about so. I might also, let's just leave it like that. I might also move the camera a little in, so GZZ to zoom in, and we'll look at something that looks like that. So the camera position is okay. Next up, what I might move it down a lot, and then let's maybe rotate it up like that. Okay, great. Next up, I'll go ahead and change the light source from a point lamp to a sun lamp, and the strength will be maybe something like 10. The color will be a slight yellow. Let's just move it up over here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and turn the viewport shading to rendered mode. So this is what it looks like when rendered in Eevee. So at the moment, that doesn't look anything like clouds, and our scene doesn't look well set up to be able to display the clouds well. So let's now work on fixing up the background. So for the background, let's go to the world properties, and let's go ahead and change the color from being a boring gray. Let's go ahead and use a environment texture. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and use a HDRI image. So in this case, I got this one from hdriskies.com. Go ahead and look for HDRI Sky 275 if you want to go ahead and follow with the exact same sky as me. The main goal really is to find a sky that does not have clouds in it. I don't really have the best example, because even in this scene there are some little clouds over here, but from the viewport that I'm looking at, there will not be any clouds in the sky. The clouds will purely come from the volumetric shader that we're about to set up. Okay, so once that's done, I'm going to go ahead now and start to work on the materials. So now that another thing that you need to do with the sunlight, we need to position it around about the same kind of position that you have this world in. So in this case, I might move the sun lamp over here. Well, actually, let's be a little bit this way, so that it's in a similar angle to the HDRI sun. I do this because the shadows will look a lot more realistic for our final render. Okay, so now that our scene is set up, next thing we need to do is start to create the actual cloud itself. So believe it or not, our clouds are going to come from this cube over here. And it's all done through the magic of shaders. Okay, so let's go ahead now and change over to the shading workspace. So this is where we will define the shader for our cloud. So I'll go ahead and change this to the rendered view. And there's a few settings that we need to change for our rendered view before we start to work with the shaders. Let's go to the render properties, and under volumetrics, let's go ahead and ramp the samples up to 128 and the tile size to 4 pixels. This will make the quality of the volumetrics a little better, but I think for the final render we'll change over to 2 pixels. This will give the best quality that you can get out of volumetrics in Eevee, and also the highest sample count possible, which is 256. You can't really go 512. 256 is the maximum. I don't want to do it right now while I'm defining the shaders because it could be a little slow, so I'll just ramp it down for now because I want the viewport to react a little quicker. So let's go ahead and save our work. Let's go ahead now and start to define the shader. So the shader for the actual clouds will not be a principled BSDF, and let's go ahead and delete that node by hitting X on our keyboard. Then we're going to go ahead and add a new node, so let's go to add shader, and we'll be using the principled volume shader. Okay, so this is the shader that will be used to create the clouds. So let's connect this volume to this volume, and now we have pretty much a volume for our clouds. So now we can see that our cube is made up of a complete volume. Now this was mentioned by another tutorial that I followed from CG Cookie. You can't use any other shape for the volume. So for example, if I use the icosphere, for example, and then I attempt to make this one the cloud, so let's go ahead and name this material cloud. If I do the same thing and reuse this material for the cloud, it also ends up being like a cube shape. So at the moment, volumetrics in Eevee only work with cube kind of shapes. So the manipulation of the shape of our clouds will all be done within the node editor. So this is where the magic will happen. Okay, so before we go ahead and do that, let's just make a few little tweaks to the principal volume. Change the color and make it completely white. We want our clouds to be white rather than any other color. Also, we want to make sure that the sun lamp, yeah, that looks okay. And we want to make sure that shadows turned on, as well as contact shadows. And I think we're good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and select the cloud object, and let's start to work with the shader for the cloud. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to start to define the overall shape of our cloudscape. And the best way to do that is through using a noise texture. So let's go ahead and go Shift A, texture, noise texture, and let's connect the color to the density. So this will start to break up our cloud and will start to look more like clouds. But at the moment, you can't really see much difference. And that's because there's not enough gradient going over here. Because for density, the parts in black tend to equal 0 density, and the parts in white equals 100% density, which means very, very solid. So we need to break this up and show a little bit more contrast. So the way to do that is by using a color ramp. So let's go to converter color ramp. So let's plot this black value so that we get a little bit more gradient, and now we start to see the noise texture. Okay, and also what I might also do is go ahead and hit Control A in the 3D viewport and apply scale. So straight away we have very, very simple but very low resolution looking clouds. So if you want, we can pull this up a little bit more. But what I want is I want a lot more blue areas. In terms of how far you should move this slider, that really depends on you. If you want to have more blue sky, then move this more to the right. If you want to have a lot more cloudier day, then move this more to the left. Okay, so for this case I might go for something around about there, I guess. I'll also move this over here to allow a bit more density. in those clouds. And I think that's looking good. And what we'll also do is I might go ahead and go Shift A. I'll go ahead and input a texture coordinate node, and then Shift A a vector mapping node. And this time we'll connect the object output of the texture coordinate into the vector of the mapping node, and then the vector output into the vector input of the noise texture. Okay, so this the main reason I'm using the object is because we want the noise texture to be controlled by the object itself rather than anything else. So in this case, I think the cloud is looking a little too thin, too small. So let's drop the scale of that to maybe 1. I want the cloud to be even bigger than that, so maybe 0.5. Maybe a little smaller than that, 0.8. I think something like that is a good start. Maybe we can just move this out. Yeah, something like that may be a good start. But at the moment, our cloud is looking way too soft. Our realistic clouds tend to look a little bit more wispy. It tends to have little bits coming out like that. And we can do that by turning up the detail size. So I'll go crazy with this and go to the maximum, which is 10. And now we start to see a little bit more of that realistic cloud shape. Okay. If you want to control the density of these clouds, there's 2 ways to do it. You can either select this white control over here, and then select this one, and then for the value, the V part, just turn it up depending on how dense you want these clouds to be. And there is a problem. There is no volumetric shadows coming through. We need that to come through to look more realistic. So there's another thing that I forgot to do. Let's go back to the render properties, and under the volumetrics, we also need to turn on volumetric shadows. Straight away, that looks far more realistic. Okay, so we could go ahead and call it a day and say that's somewhat realistic, but we want to make our clouds look even more realistic than that. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of hide this for now. So let's just turn this off. So let's go back to the way it was before. We're going to be adding in a few more nodes. The first node I want to go ahead and add is the, let's see, let's go ahead and add in a Voronoi texture, and let's connect the color to yet again another color ramp, but I'll do that a little bit later. Let's go to the color and directly into the density. We can't really see what's going on, so we need higher contrast in our Voronoi, and we get something that looks like this. But we want to also make use of this mapping over here, this object mapping. So let's go ahead and connect that to the vector, and we see something that looks like this. We don't need this part to have very high density, so we can turn that down. This can be a little bit more dense than that, I guess, maybe 1.5. And this doesn't need to be as doesn't need to have as many cloud wisps, so I can sort of control that. Yeah, around about that is okay. Maybe play around with the scale until you get something that you like, but I think something like that should be okay. And I'll go ahead and add in some noise texture to break it up even more. So let's go to color, mix RGB, and let's mix this color with another noise texture. So texture, noise texture, connect this to this, and then this to this. So we can't really see what's going on over here. That's because we need to change this one from mix to, let's say, overlay. Also, sorry, I want to make use of this mapping over here into this vector. Okay, so now our Voronoi is looking a little bit noisier, but before we go ahead and do that, the Voronoi is looking a little bit too sharp as well. So the way to make it a little bit more smooth, I changed from F1 to smooth F1. But I guess it can be bigger now. So let's go to 2 or 3. Yeah, 3. Now let's go 2. But then we want more of these. So all I'm doing now is I've disconnected these ones and I've just added this level over here. This will just make the clouds look a little bit more noisier and a little bit more random. So that's pretty much all I'm doing. Okay, so with that done, I'll go ahead now and mix in this cloud with this cloud. So this is the level 1 where I define where the major cloud forms goes. So you can sort of imagine in levels. This is the first level of the clouds. So this just defines the major areas of where the clouds will be. And this second level is just like the detail of the clouds. So go ahead and go to color, mix RGB. We mix this one. This one should go at the bottom. And then we put this one at the top. But now the clouds are appearing everywhere. So we use an overlay node to say that this one is where the main form of where the clouds will be, but the second layer is where the noise and everything will be. But at the moment I can't really tell that. So let me just look at why that is. Oh, okay, so that's where the main, I think I accidentally changed something here. Yeah, so that's pretty much where I want the major forms of the cloud to be. And now if I mix it, and overlay in that noise, so there it is with the cloud on its own with 0 factor, but then when I overlay the noise, it breaks up that cloud form and looks a lot more random. So you have these little wisps, you have these little random noisy bits, and it looks a lot more realistic. If you want to add a little bit more detail to the clouds, you can also go ahead and go a little bit more crazy with it and mix in another noise texture. So go Shift D and then go color, mix RGB, and just add in another level of noise to the existing cloud. So I think this won't do too much. Oh yeah, it does do a little bit much. So let's just have a look at that on its own. That's going a little crazy, and if I use the same vector coordinate, it will look exactly the same, but then if I go ahead and change the scale to maybe 1.2, and then let's control something like that, and now mix that up with the noise, we get a lot more detail in those clouds. Okay. So that's pretty much that. Of course, if we, yeah, I think that should be fine. That should be good. Okay, so if I go ahead and add in a plane, okay, so I guess the density of those clouds can be a little thicker, I think. If you want to make the clouds even more dense, you can, sorry, I forgot to mention earlier that you can make the clouds even more dense than just changing the value over here. You can also use a converter math node. Go multiply, and then multiply based on however dense you want these clouds to be. So for the lower one, I might make this a little bit more dense than the other parts of the clouds. Okay, so we have something like that. Final thing we need to do to finish off our cloud is to, well, fix up the shadows over here. It's looking a little bit too black, especially for a very blue sky. With realistic clouds, the clouds tend to look, the shadowy areas tend to look almost similar to the same color as the sky. So in this case, it needs to look a little bit more bluer. So the quick fix to do that is to just add in an area lamp. So Shift A, light, area, then go to the front view, then R180. Move it up, and then let's turn up the scale. So let's go to the light settings and increase the size to pretty much encompass the entire cloudscape. And let's change this to pretty much the same color as the sky. And then we need to increase the strength. Don't go overboard, otherwise it will look it will start to look not dense enough. So we just want to make it something like that, and there we go. So compared to 0, where it looks almost black, if you just ramp it up to 50, it looks a little bit more blue, and that completes our sky. Now for the final step, to animate these clouds, the way I would do it is I would first of all, let's go ahead to the animation workspace and change this to the rendered view. We have a timeline over here, but this time I'll change this one. This time I'll change this one to use the shader editor. The animation will be done using the node editor. So in frame 1 over here, I'll go ahead and hover my mouse over the X and hit I. And then in frame, let's say 100, let's just move the cloud somewhere there. It really depends how fast or how slow you want your cloud to move. So I'll just go 4 meters and hit I. So if I go back and play back the animation, you can see the cloud moving. I know it looks very, very weird in the viewport when it plays back like that, but that's because it's trying to calculate in real time. But when you render your final animation, it won't look like that weird. So don't worry about it. It's just a viewport not responding quick enough. Okay, so I think that's the very simple way to do it. Also with the animation, there is a little mistake. Blender by default tends to use Bezier curves for the animation handle type. What that means, the animation will start slow, go really fast, and then slow down, as if it's a car accelerating and then slowing down. So make sure you're in the dope sheet editor, and then you won't see anything over here until you click this mapping node. So then you can see the keyframes that we just applied. And hover your mouse inside this dope sheet editor, hit V, so we'll go ahead and use vector. So now the animation will play a constant speed. But I tend to find to make the animation look a little bit more realistic, it's better to use another mapping node, and then use this as the object vector, and then connect this one to this noise texture instead. It'll be a little slow, and then use this one to render at a different pace. So if I go at 0 over here, let's go I, now frame 100, I'll say maybe 2, and then hit I. So this should go at a slightly different pace compared to the other, and it should look a little bit more realistic. So I think that's about it. So let's go ahead and do a quick render using the best resolution possible. So in the render properties, let's go ahead and maybe turn up the sampling to 128 to double it. Under volumetrics, let's crank this up to 256, which is the highest. And tile size, we've got to 2 pixels. And I think everything else, shadow samples, if you want you can double it, but I don't know if that makes much difference. Let's go to 64. Let's go ahead and give that a quick render just to see what that looks like. So hit F12 to render. As you can see, it's taking a little bit of time to render this because we are using the highest settings. So there you go, that's how you create clouds in Blender 2.82 and Eevee. I mean, it doesn't look super realistic. You need to use something like cycles for that, but I think this is pretty much good enough to be used in a background for a movie or a scene or anything like that. So it's a very, very quick way to generate clouds in Blender 2.82 and Eevee.